Module 31, the Ching Dynasty. I, Dr. Rita Pratap, former head of the Department, Drawing and Painting, University of Rajasthan. I am going to speak on the Ching Dynasty. The Ching court and its patronage. In 1694, the Ming Dynasty, by then in a precarious state, was overthrown by invading armies from Manchuria, who at once established a new dynasty. The Ching, Peking remained the capital. The figure here shows the Temple of Heaven, Peking. This three-tiered circular building with its magnificent blue-tiled roof and brilliantly painted woodwork is a part of 700-acre Temple of Heaven complex, to which the emperor returned each year at dawn on the winter solstice to renew his mandate from heaven. Conscious of being aliens on Chinese soil and aware of the fate that had befallen the Mongols, the Manchu rulers were anxious to secure support of the Chinese intelligentsia and to attract back into public service the numerous scholar officials who had prudently retired when the Ming Dynasty fell. In this they were successful, as the Chinese official class served them loyally for nearly 3 centuries. In order to prevent any possibilities of a conspiracy, however, the Manchus imposed upon educated Chinese a rigorous censorship and a tight control of thought. Many scholars in the imperial service were induced to adopt an extremely cautious and conservative attitude of mind, which is found reflected in their paintings. The first 4 emperors of the Qing dynasty led China to its greatest territorial expansion, created a high degree of prosperity, and brought the empire internal peace. The powerful Manchurian tribal leader Nurachi laid the foundations of the takeover of the Ming Empire, which was in terminal decline. In 1644, a minor came to power, his reign lasting until 1661. In other words, his reign extended from the fall of the Ming Dynasty to the final reconsolidation of the empire. It was Kang Hissi who reigned from 1662 to 1722, who was able to unite Chinese under Manchurian rule by his forward-looking policies and his tolerance. During his period, China concluded a treaty with a European power. Russia made a commitment to recognize the West Amur region as Chinese. The signing of a treaty was executed in Chinese, Manchurian, Russian, and Latin. The Manchurian administration was bilingual. It used Chinese and Manchurian. Evidence of this can be found even today on the signs inside the Imperial Palace building. An example is of an entrance sign above the gate of a residential palace. This is in the collection of Imperial Palace, Beijing. The Kang Hissi emperor did not repeat the crucial political mistake of his predecessor Kublai Khan, but fired the highest officers equally with Manchurian and Chinese officials. He adopted the Chinese system of administration, confirmed Confucianism as an official state doctrine. Nevertheless, in protest against foreign rule, many retreated to exile in the country. Among them were few talented, extremely non-conformist painters, and as a result, the number of the literary artists fell in comparison with the number of academy artists, and the philosophical and stylistic differences between the two groups grew wider. The independent painter scholars who allowed the world to take its own course developed motives which were different from those of their serving colleagues. At court, by contrast, a documentary style of painting arose as its first priority, embracing portraiture as well as landscapes and history of painting. The Emperor Kang He established a bureau of painting that became known by the name of Old Sung Imperial Painting Academy. Hua Yuan, though it had none of the prestige and freedom of its predecessor, Kang He treated his senior painters like superior artisans, keeping them constantly busy as decorators, recorders of historical events, and illustrators of encyclopedic works such as Kang Chi Tu, a treatise completed in 1696 on rice and silk culture. This development was encouraged by an energetic editing and publishing program, for which tens of thousands of scripts were examined, the result being extensive anthologies for all literary genres and huge illustrated encyclopedias. For these, the court painters were kept busy creating designs for the illustrated woodcuts. An example of a bird on a pomegranate branch. It is a colored woodcut from the painting textbook from the Mustard Seed Garden, edited by Wang Enji and his brothers, dated to 1679 to 1701, Museum of Munich. Another example is of a hibiscus page of a book with illustration from the compendium of old and new pictures and scripts section on botany, chapter 294, and at present in Frankfurt University. Thus, the above two works represent a totally new development in woodcut technique, since they were not always worked with outlines. Colored woodcut attained the quality of the flower picture done with ink and a wash. An example is a lily blossom, also a colored woodcut from the painting textbook from the Mustard Seed Garden, edited by Wang Enji and his brothers, dated to 1679 to 1701, and at present in the Museum of Munich. Here, the blossoms are drawn with outlines, only the ridges on the leaf have lines drawn in an ink outline. Peach branch in an antique vase. This is a colored woodcut from the painting textbook from the Mustard Seed Garden, edited by Wang Enji and his brothers, dated to 1679 to 1701, and at present in the Museum of Munich. The woodcut shows on the one hand the arrangement of the branch, on the other a combination of objects painted with and without outlines. The Yongzheng Emperor who reigned from 1722 to 1735, continued the Kang Hishi's policies during his rule, but in a modified way. He banned Christian missions, introduced checks on bureaucrats by employing anonymous informers. The conservatism demanded of scholars was expected also of court painters. Yuan Qiang, a court painter to the Emperor Yung Cheng, specialized in landscapes in the manner of northern Shung masters. Qian Lung, who reigned from 1736 to 1796, on taking over the government in 1736, ruled over 150 million people. At the beginning of the 1796, he abandoned voluntarily and spent the last 3 years of his life in seclusion in his palace, enjoying art in cultural as well as political matters. His period of rule was one of the most magnificent of the Ching Dynasty. He was a patron of the arts, wrote poetry himself, and possessed collection of various objects d'art, and was the patron of countless scholarly works, including a catalogue of bronzes and a celebrated catalogue of the imperial collection of manuscripts and paintings. This catalogue is an inventory of the paintings and calligraphic works by the emperor and his predecessors had collected. Artist Yuan Qiang's nephew Yuan Yao was also a painter employed by Qin Lung. Yuan Yao's travelling in the mountains in autumn shows how boldly they could adapt the typical S-curve composition and twisting rocks of Q Hissi, adding color and much realistic detail to produce a picture that was not only unmistakably in Q Hissi tradition, but also decorative and interesting to look at. Scholar painters, of course, would have heartily condemned so crude and mannered a reference to the style of the great Shung landscapist. The decorative style favored at court found another master in Shen Chuan or Shen Nan Pin. His screen painting, Peacocks, dated to 1690, is in the collection of B.M. London, is worth mentioning. Although never actually as a court painter, he is worthy of mention as having spent years from 1731 to 1733 in Nagasaki at the invitation of a rich Japanese art patron. His delicate flower painting too had considerable influence on Japanese artists, who assumed quite wrongly that they were typical examples of the Chinese literary style. Ceramics. A wide variety of superb ceramics were produced at the imperial kilns at Changsha, China during the Ching Dynasty. A century of excellence began in 1683 when Kang Hissi, who reigned from 1662 to 1723, emperor appointed trained officials to be on site supervisors of the imperial kilns. Chinese ceramics were in great demand in Europe in the 18th century. At the same time, foreign novelties were of great interest to the Chinese. Qing potters drew inspiration not only from earlier period in Chinese history, but from European decorative styles as well. While ceramics incorporating European designs, elements were occasionally made for the emperor. Porcelain wares intended for imperial use were usually far more restrained in design than the flamboyantly decorated ceramics made for the export market. An example is of 3 objects for the writing table belonging to Ching Dynasty, mark and reign of Kang Hissi 1661 to 1772, porcelain with clear de lune glaze and at present in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The pale blue clair de lune or moonlight glaze is among the most widely admired and beautiful ceramics of Ching Dynasty glazes. The 3 beautiful and functional objects shown are sheathed in this delicate moonlight glaze. The greatest innovations in Ching porcelains are to be found in the enamel decorated wares, in which color glazes are applied over the glaze before a second firing, whose fresh appellations family verte and family rose, family noir are by now firmly ensconced in the language. Family verte wares comprise large vases in green, rose, black and brown enamels, sometimes including underglaze or overglaze, blue with green predominating. The decorations are floral motifs or narrative scenes from famous tales or novels with designs vigorously and boldly drawn. An example is of a vase belonging to Ching Dynasty, probably Kang Hissi period. Porcelain painted in overglaze enamels, family verte and gilt, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York. It is brightly colored with distinctive green tones. Family verte enamels are thickly applied over darker outlines and details. This beaker shaped vase is decorated with a lively pattern of birds, rocks and flowers. The family rose, the rose family of porcelains, is more characteristic of the later. Yung Chang reigned from 1723 to 1736 and Qian Lung reigned from 1736 to 1796. These porcelains almost always show the white ground with rose or yellow enamels predominating and green as supporting note in foliage. An example is of a bowl belonging to Qing Dynasty, mark the reign of Yung Chang. Porcelain painted in overglaze polychrome enamels, family rose and at present in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York. Admired for the soft rose coloration, the finest family rose porcelains of this period were made for the exclusive use of the emperor and his court. The design on this elegant bowl begins on the outside, continues over the rim and is completed on the inner surface. Glass production began to flourish in 1696 after the Kang Hissi emperor set up a glass studio within the imperial workshop at Beijing. Used mostly for Buddhist ritual objects until Ming Dynasty, glass was never as popular in China as porcelain, lacquer and jade. Glass vessels decorated by incising, carving, moulding, enameling, diamond point engraving or overlay, cameo glass were often modelled after ceramic, jade, lacquer and bronze vessel. During the Ching Dynasty, glass was used for bowls, snuff bottles, lanterns, window panes and scientific instruments as well as for imitation gemstones to be used in jewelry and hairpins. Enameled decoration was sometimes applied to opaque white glass in imitation of porcelain. An example is of a duck and drake, Ching Lung period dated to 1736 to 1796 belonging to Ching Dynasty, and today it is in a private collection. The painting of duck and drake which mate for life was symbolic of domestic bliss and marital harmony. Decorative carving such as this was often used as ornaments or paperweights. Decorative arts. Other decorative arts are numerous, technically refined and often interesting, even beautiful in an ornamental way. A revived interest in the decorative arts led to an increase in the production of ornate lacquerwares, ivory carvings, textiles and jewelry. An example is of a scholar's brush holder and brush belonging to Ching Dynasty and of Ching Lung period, mottled green jade and at present in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York. In the continuous scene carved deeply into the outside of this jade brush holder, Taoist sages and their attendants inhabit a stylized landscape. European influence on Ching court painting. In the 16th century, Europeans penetrated into the Far East. Hard on the heels of the first Spanish and Portuguese raiding parties came Catholic missionaries, among whom the Jesuits were outstanding for their success in winning the confidence of the ruling class wherever they went. This they achieved by offering to China for the greater glory of the Church the skills and sciences of which Europe was master. Devotional engravings were brought to Peking in 1601 by the Italian Jesuit missionary Matteo Ricci, caused a great stir among the few who saw them. Some of these engravings were imitated by painters and decorators into whose hands they fell. The baptism of Christ is a European engraving copied on Chinese porcelain plate. It belongs to 18th century and now in the collection of B.M. London. Painters at the court were astonished at the power of Western artists to suggest solid form and depth by means of shading and linear perspective. It is said that even the critique Tung Chi Chiang is said to have copied them. They had no influence whatever upon the mainstream of Chinese painting. In 1662, when Chiang Hsi was ruling, the Jesuits were well entrenched in Peking, teaching astronomy, mathematics, engineering and architecture to a receptive audience of scholars at court. In 1715, the Italian Jesuit painter Giuseppe Castiglione, also known by his Chinese name Lang Shi Ning, arrived in Peking and soon established a studio in the palace ground with a great number of assistants. Here he painted realistic portraits of the Emperor Qianlong, who was very pleased with them. A great number of detailed scrolls illustrating the emperor's travels, campaigns and court ceremony, Lang Shi-ning cleverly combined the Chinese format, medium and certain landscape conventions with the Western perspective, shading and realistic drawing. These brilliant exercises in synthetic craftsmanship were greatly admired at court. The hand scroll in the National Palace Museum, Taipei, depicting 100 horses at pasture, 20 to 30 feet long, section of a hand scroll, ink and color on silk, belonging to Ching Dynasty, characteristically combines Western realism in shading and modeling of the horses with Chinese conventions in the painting of trees and mountains. Nevertheless, one of Castiglione's most adept pupils, the court painter and official Tusu Ai Kui, while praising Western painting for its realism, condemned it for its lack of brush manner. The brush stroke is very foundation of Chinese painting. In Tusu Ai Kui opinion, artists who ignored this and worked entirely in the Western style were not painters at all, but mere artisans. The Chinese European style of Castiglione and his followers was fashionable at court through the reign of Qian Lung, though after the abolition of the Jesuit order in China in 1773 and the withdrawal of the missionaries, it gradually faded away. It had no influence whatever upon the Chinese literati, and by the 19th century it had ceased to be an important factor even in court painting. Thus, the painting during the Qing period can be divided into two main types: the painting of the literati who flourished independently of the court, and the painting of the court artist, which showed a predominantly documentary and in architecture decorative character. The so-called academy painters worked in imperial workshops. They were engaged in portraying whatever pleased the emperor as accurately as true to nature as possible. To a lesser extent, this was also true of the portraits of the imperial concubines, even though the artists were not allowed to see them face to face. In addition, genre scenes were painted. These can be divided into three main groups: pictures of important state events, among them court ceremonies, imperial journeys, birthdays and weddings; scenes of everyday life as documents of the world outside the palace walls; representations of an ethnographic kind of foreigners, ethnic or cultural minorities, and people on the periphery of the empire. The Christian missionaries active at the Chinese court helped to acquaint the Chinese with the paintings of events. The formats of the documentary paintings were mostly hand scrolls, but albums were widely used. The 12 scrolls of Kang He, Emperor's Journey to the South, with a total length of more than 200 meters, that is 656 feet, together form the largest painting in the world. The Qianlong Emperor, who in the footsteps of his grandfather also undertook inspection journeys to the south. To advertise his claim to power, 12 such scrolls were made, though shorter ones. Part of these were edited to edited in the form of a travel manual with the title Ceremonial of the Journey to the South. The subjects included attractive landscapes and also view and plans of the palaces on the journey where the imperial entourage stopped. An example is of a cliff of the swallows near Nanjing. Southern Travel album of 1765, colored woodcut, Museum of Frankfurt. High above the Jiang River, one can see a pavilion with a view. The last form of academy painting, a particularly interesting one in terms of Chinese history and culture, was the documentation of the customs and festivals of the many ethnic people of the state of Qing. An example is of a Tiger Hill by Su Chao, Southern Travel album of 1765, colored woodcut and at present in the Museum of Frankfurt. Here the site of the Yuan monastery and a 10th century pagoda is seen. The style of this painting is paraphrased as precise brushwork, many colors. Common to all the artists of this period, however, was the preference for arranging the pictures into an album making. The album leaf, the most widely used format painting. Irrespective of the number of leaves the album had, artists could display the full range of their techniques. In this small format, which were from 20 to 30 centimeters in height and 20 and 30 to 60 centimeters in width, the albums which were most popular were the works arranged in terms of themes and techniques.